Pakistan is one of those countries that has a terrible reputation in the media and is portrayed really badly in mainstream media, particularly in Western countries, but that will really, really surprise you once you actually travel there and you realize how beautiful it is, the spectacular nature that it has, and the fascinating culture and historical heritage of the country. And because the media's portrayal of Pakistan is so different from its reality, there are so many things that really surprised me as a foreigner and as a European in Pakistan that no amount of research could have prepared me for. So I've spent the past few videos showing different sides of Pakistan, different places from Lahore, Skardu, Hunza, Fairy Meadows, and showing its fascinating beauty and cultural heritage. But in this video, I want to focus on all of the little culture shocks that I had in the country, things that really surprised me and that I didn't expect. So if you want to know a foreigner's perspective on what it's like to travel to Pakistan and all of the culture shocks that come with traveling to Pakistan, make sure you stay until the end of this video. And if you're new here, hi, my name is Laura, and in this channel, I share lots of travel vlogs, hidden gems, culture videos, travel information videos. So if that seems like something you like watching, make sure you stay for more. So the first big culture shock that I had in Pakistan was the traffic. It was so insane and so chaotic, and I have never experienced anything like this. So my trip to Pakistan started in Islamabad, and I didn't think that the traffic in Islamabad was too crazy. The roads were in good condition, and there wasn't a lot of traffic to begin with, so there wasn't a lot of chaos. Two things that did surprise me though was seeing people just crossing the highway, like walking across the highway. I have never seen that anywhere else, and it was really shocking to me. And also there were lots of people on motorcycles that were not wearing helmets, and that didn't surprise me too much, but what really surprised me was that a lot of them carried a helmet on their knees. Like instead of wearing it on their head, they carried it on their knees, which to me makes no sense at all. So that really surprised me. After Islamabad, I went to Gilgit-Baltistan. So I took the road that goes from Islamabad all the way to Babusar Top and Chuchalas. So that road was a bit crazy because there's a lot of traffic. The driving is absolutely insane. Like I have never seen people drive in such a crazy way before. It was just, I have no words to describe it, but it was just insanity to me. And that road is also not in great condition, which I don't think that's a big deal. It's very difficult to build roads at such high altitudes with such mountains, so I didn't expect it to be like a perfect pristine road. I think it's pretty normal for it to be in the condition that it was, but it was still really shocking though. In Gilgit-Baltistan, I'd say that the roads were better actually, and the driving wasn't as insane because there weren't as many cars on the road, but what was really crazy were all the landslides. So Gilgit-Baltistan, some of the mountains there are 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 meters high, and you're building a road in those mountains, so sometimes rocks just fall onto the road, and there were so many of them. That's what was really crazy to me, is just the crazy amount of landslides that were in those roads, that happened along those roads. Like when I was driving from Hunza to Skardu, well, I wasn't driving, I had a driver, but I was in the car going from Hunza to Skardu. I saw so many, like I lost count of how many landslides I saw. So that felt pretty dangerous just because of the environment that the roads were in. But I mean, what else can you do? If there's mountains, there's going to be landslides. But still, I saw nothing in Gilgit-Baltistan because when I got to Lahore, oh my god, the traffic there is absolute insanity. I have never seen anything like it. I saw multiple people on one motorbike. Women, I'm not sure why women don't sit like men on motorbikes, so they put both of their legs to one side instead of one leg on each side of the motorbike. I'm not sure if that makes any sense. I don't think I have any footage of women on motorbikes, but I feared for them so much because I constantly thought that they were going to fall off their bikes, and that terrified me, honestly. I was terrified for them. That was such a huge culture shock, and I saw some of them, like multiple women riding a motorbike like that in Lahore, and sometimes carrying children or carrying objects, and I was so scared for them. Also seeing so many little kids in the front of their motorbike, I feel like I've never seen that before anywhere. Or seeing people again cross the highway just walking when it is full of traffic or people going in the wrong direction in the highway. It was just insane to me. Like, the driving in Lahore was just a level of chaos that I have never experienced. So yeah, I think it's fair to say that the driving in Pakistan, whether it's the actual driving and the traffic or the roads, was the biggest shock that I had. And some of it is cultural, some of it is just the environment, but it was truly, truly shocking to me. But a close second was the amount of stares that I got. So people stared at me pretty much everywhere I went in Pakistan, but particularly in the big cities, so Islamabad and Lahore, especially Lahore. So many people stared at me, and I kind of knew that this could happen, but I just didn't expect the intensity of it to be that great, because so many people stared at me at the same time and stared for so long. Like, they would stare deep into my eyes and they would not take their sight off of me. And I don't think that people do this maliciously. I've talked about this before in my vlogs about Lahore and Islamabad. I don't think people have bad intentions at all, and foreigners are not very common in Pakistan. Pakistan is not a country that receives a whole lot of international tourism, so it's only natural that people are curious and will stare at you. But I think the combination of, the fact that in Western countries staring at someone is considered very rude, and the combination of so many people staring at you at the same time, it just makes for a really strange situation and a really awkward situation. So even though I knew that no one had any bad intentions when they stared at me or they looked at me, it still made me feel very uncomfortable. I was still very uncomfortable in some situations. Like, for example, when I was in the Pakistan Monument in Islamabad, that was a bit uncomfortable. And when I was in Lahore Fort as well. But that is just culture shock for you. I'm not angry at anyone. I'm not mad at anyone that they looked. It was just an uncomfortable situation because I'm not used to it at all. And I had a bit of a similar situation when it came to photos. So many people asked for selfies with me and with my travel buddy, which I was not used to at all, but I accepted for the most part. And I will say, the few times when I did not accept, people were very kind and they understood for the most part, so that was really nice. What was a bit uncomfortable and I didn't like was people taking photographs of me without my permission. There were some times when I was just walking and I could see someone pointing their phone at me or zooming into me, and that was a bit uncomfortable and I didn't like that. Moving on, another big culture shock that I had was the clothing in Pakistan. So before I traveled, I watched a series of YouTube videos that kind of misinformed me and led me to believe that in Islamabad particularly, a lot of people would dress in a more Western way, quote unquote Western way, like in t-shirts and jeans. So I dressed like that, thinking that I would fit in, like that I wouldn't stand out too much, and I was completely wrong. I stood out a lot. I don't think I saw a single person in jeans and a t-shirt while I was in Islamabad. Most men wore traditional dress and women as well. So if I got stared at just normally wearing more modest clothing when I wore just a t-shirt, the stares were absolutely insane. So that is a mistake that I made. I'm not sure if I just didn't do my research right or if I didn't watch the right YouTube videos, but I was definitely not well informed in that sense. And something else that happened, which was really interesting regarding clothing, is that the traditional clothing men wear in Pakistan, I believe it's called a shalwar kameez. I'm not entirely sure about that, but it's the long t-shirt and trousers that is usually brown or white or a solid color basically. In Western media, that traditional dress is portrayed so badly and is associated with violence and really, really bad things. So when I got on my flight to Pakistan, I flew from Qatar to Islamabad to go into the country. So many men were wearing shalwar kameez, and for some reason it really, really intimidated me. I think that at the end of the day, even though a piece of clothing doesn't determine whether you're a violent person or not, and I know that consciously, I know that subconsciously, I've watched so much media in my lifetime growing up in Europe and associating that to violence that subconsciously it really intimidated me, even though consciously I knew that it shouldn't. I'm not sure if that makes sense. I hope I explained it well. But long story short, I was a little bit intimidated by men wearing shalwar kameez when I arrived in Pakistan, which is ridiculous, but at the same time it isn't. And that ended the minute that one of these men wearing traditional clothing started talking to us, asking me and my travel buddy where we were from, and welcoming us to Pakistan, and being so incredibly kind and hospitable that that idea completely evaporated, you know? Like, I felt so welcomed in the country and so safe immediately. And everything that the media had inculcated into my brain suddenly went away. And that is the power of travel and of culture shock, in my opinion, because it is one thing to know something, to consciously know something, and it is a different thing to feel it and experience it. It is one thing to consciously know that Pakistan is safe, and it is another thing to experience safety in Pakistan. They are two completely different things. So that's why I'm really thankful that I got to travel to Pakistan, and why I love travel is because now I don't just know that Pakistan is a safe and welcoming country. I felt it and I feel it. Speaking of hospitality, before I traveled to Pakistan, I watched multiple YouTube videos about the country, and I'd been wanting to go to Pakistan for years, so I watched a lot of content about it before I went. And everyone that has been to Pakistan told me that it was the most hospitable country ever, and I wasn't sure that I believed them at first. Because people tend to romanticize countries on social media and to portray them in an overly positive light. So I wasn't sure if they were saying that because it was genuinely true, or if they were just trying to look good for people on social media. But after having traveled to Pakistan myself, I can confirm that Pakistan truly is a super hospitable and welcoming country. Pakistanis are so kind and welcoming. I felt so welcomed in the country. And I can confirm that people don't just say this for social media. It is actually true. One really cool story that I have is on my second day in the country, as we were going from Islamabad to Gilgit-Baltistan, we stopped at a gas station to buy some water bottles, and out of nowhere, a local Pakistani man offered to buy them for us simply because we were tourists and guests in their country. And that was crazy to me because I have never seen any other country where that happens. And everywhere that I went to in the country, from Islamabad to KPK, Hunza, Skardu, Deosai, Lahore, Ferry Meadows, everywhere, people kept welcoming me and making me feel so welcomed in Pakistan. And even today, as I keep posting videos from my time in the country, people in the comments are so nice and keep welcoming me back and just being incredibly hospitable. And hospitality like that is very, very difficult to find in other countries, and I've never experienced anything quite like it. Hospitality was truly one of my favorite things about traveling to Pakistan, but another thing that I loved about Pakistan was the food. So Pakistani food is delicious, and something that surprised me is that there's a lot of dishes that are not super spicy, because before I traveled to Pakistan, I assumed that all of the food would be incredibly spicy, and it wasn't. There were lots of dishes like Kabuli pulao, for example, that was one of my favorite ones, which I think anyone can eat. And even the spice, I handled it pretty well. I was able to eat the super spicy dishes, and I don't know, I was surprised by myself there. I didn't think that I would be able to handle it. Other things that I noticed is that Pakistanis eat a lot of meat. Like, there is so much like chicken and rice basically everywhere, and they eat a lot of meat, a lot of mutton, not a lot of fish and vegetables though, which I thought was really interesting. I'm not sure why. So yeah, Pakistan, it's not a very vegetarian friendly country, if I'm completely honest, but the food is still delicious. I still loved it, and I'm not vegetarian, so I was fine. And I also really enjoyed all of the chai and all of the naan. The garlic naan was my favorite. And every serving had so much food. Like they serve so much food all the time. Like, it could feed so many people. You order for one and really it's for two, but that really surprised me as well. And something that I simply could not understand about Pakistan, and that really, really infuriated me, was the food menus. So basically, every time that I would go to a restaurant or that I would ask for a food menu at a hotel, they had all of these food options. And initially I thought, oh wow, great, I can order so much food, or like I have so much variety, so many dishes to choose from. But that wasn't true. When it came down to it, they only had like 10% of the menu and the other 90% was not available. And that happened so often at so many different restaurants. Like, it happened at the hotel that I stayed at in Lahore. It also happened at Haveli restaurant in Lahore. Like, I tried to order something and they would say, oh, sorry, this dish isn't available. So I would point to something else and they would also say, this is also not available. So I would point to another thing and that also wouldn't be available. So it was so infuriating, honestly. At the end of, like, there were a couple of occasions where I just asked straightforward, like, okay, what do you have? Like, what can you bring me? And not in a rude way, but just because everything that I tried to order simply wasn't available. And again, it didn't happen in just one place. It happened all over the country. So I'm not sure what is going on with this, but I don't know, that really, really struck me. And I thought it was so interesting, but so infuriating at the same time. Something else about Pakistan that I found very interesting, yet slightly infuriating, was the bathroom situation. So this may be TMI, but I'm going to talk about it anyways. So in the West and in Europe and my country in Spain, we use like Western style bathrooms, like with a full toilet seat. But in Pakistan, a lot of bathrooms aren't like that. They're the kind of like squat toilets, like the kind of toilet which is basically a hole in the ground and you have to squat down to do your business. And most of these bathrooms also don't have toilet paper or wipes to use. Like, you use water to clean yourself up, which as a European who, like, I'm not used to these kinds of bathrooms, this was very interesting to use. But I see the vision, I really do. I actually didn't dislike it at all. But anyways, that's too much information, way too much information, but I thought it was interesting and I wanted to share. And also, in most hotels and restaurants, in my experience, the bathrooms are pretty similar to what you would find in Europe. It's mostly in like off the beaten path places in like Gilgit-Baltistan, or in rest stops and bars by the side of the road, that kind of thing, where you will find the squat toilets and like the full Pakistani bathroom experience. That's where you're gonna find it. Moving on, another very big culture shock that I had was the lack of Western cultural influence on Pakistani culture and Pakistani society, and in particular, the lack of American cultural influence. So I'm going to do my best to explain what I mean, but honestly, I'm not sure that I'm going to get my point across. But basically, I think that in Europe and the West in general, like the United States, Australia, Canada, etc., we tend to think that either the entire world lives like us or should live like us. And this is like a general idea that is perpetuated by the media, pop culture, and just in our society. And of course, we know that there's more to the world than Europe and the West, and that other people do not live like us. But I think we fail to understand it. We don't feel it. It's like, you know, when a big celebrity in America, a big musician or something like that, announces that they're doing a world tour, and the world tour is basically the United States, Europe, and Australia, and we feel like that's the whole world. It's those kinds of vibes. So when people say stuff like China is the new world power, like it's surpassed the United States, or the epicenter of world history in the 21st century is going to be in Asia, not in Europe or America as it has been previously, I think we know that, but we truly, truly do not get it. We do not understand it. And I didn't understand it until I traveled to Pakistan. So this is very difficult to explain, but Pakistan definitely gave me the sense that, in fact, Asia is the new epicenter for like world history. Like the West, like Europe and America have not lost their relevance, but they're definitely not as important as they used to be. And I knew that before, but I didn't feel it, truly feel it, until I traveled to Pakistan. And it's just a feeling that I can't explain. I can't pinpoint what exactly made me feel like that, but I think it's a combination of just the amount of people who live in Pakistan. For example, there's 230 million plus people, like 230 million plus Pakistanis, and also just seeing the country and the economy, it just truly made me feel like Europe has lost the relevance that it once had, and Asia is where it's truly at, including Pakistan. And Pakistan is actually one of the fastest developing nations in the world right now. I actually think it's the fastest, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, the development that countries like China and India have seen over the past few decades is also astounding. So it truly made me feel, I didn't just know that Asia is the epicenter of world history in this coming century. It truly made me feel it. Like I felt like I understood that after I traveled to Pakistan. Another cultural shock I had, which is kind of related to what I was just talking about, but it's not exactly the same, is the lack of influence that American pop culture has on Pakistani culture. So on the one hand, this makes a lot of sense because Pakistanis and Pakistan and the United States have not always gotten along well. But on the other hand, with globalization today and social media and internet culture, it feels like American pop culture and American celebrity gossip and music and film, it feels like it has reached almost every corner of the world. Where I live in Spain, we have so much American pop culture. I watch so many American TV shows. I watch so much American music. I know the American celebrity gossip and all of that stuff. And pretty much everywhere that I have traveled to has seen the same phenomenon. When I go to African countries, for example, to Kenya, Tanzania, South Africa, they are aware of what's going on in America and they have a very good sense of American pop culture and are influenced by it as well, whether that's something that they like to admit or not, but it happens. American pop culture has reached that corner of the world, and you would imagine that in some way or another it has reached Pakistan as well. And, maybe it has, because I haven't spent that much time in Pakistan to actually know, but if it has, it's definitely not obvious. It has not reached mainstream culture in Pakistan, and it definitely hasn't influenced Pakistan on a superficial level yet, if that makes any sense. Basically, my impression of Pakistan in this sense was that it has its own culture which has seen very little influence from American pop culture and also very little influence from Western culture in general, even though it's a former British colony. And in my experience traveling to other former British colonies, again, Kenya, Tanzania, Zambia, they have a lot more influence from the British than Pakistan has. And there's a few things in Pakistan that you can point out that definitely come from the British, like driving on the left side of the road, for example. But the influence is definitely not on the same level. And the only Western brand that I saw during my whole time in Pakistan was Coca-Cola and McDonald's. Those two have reached every corner of the world. But in most other countries I visit, there's just so many more American and European brands, and that is not the case at all in Pakistan, which I thought was interesting. Also, a little disclaimer before I continue. So I have no intention for this to be a politically charged video at all. It is not my intention to be controversial or provocative or confrontational in the slightest. This is just my very honest opinion and my very honest impressions of Pakistan as a foreign tourist, and the culture shocks that I had there, the things that I found very interesting and very shocking. So there is no need to spread hate on the comment section of this video or to comment political stuff here, because that is not what this video is about. And something I also want to make clear is that this video is not meant to be critical. This is not criticism whatsoever. I'm not criticizing Pakistan or any other country, but with any of the things that I'm saying here. These are just things that I found interesting. That is it. It is not meant to be taken as criticism. The next culture I'm going to talk about is not something that necessarily shocked me. I knew about it before I traveled to Pakistan, but I did find it very striking, and that is how militaristic Pakistani society is. So if you're familiar with Pakistan's political situation in terms of its geography, its relations with its neighbors, international relations, and South Asian politics in general, it will be no surprise to you that Pakistan places a lot of emphasis on its military and focuses a lot on its military. So although I found that very striking because I'm not used to being around such a heavy military presence, it didn't really surprise me. But what did surprise me was how much influence the military has on Pakistani culture, and I think a perfect example of this is the Wagah border parade. So this is a military parade that occurs every evening at the border between Pakistan and India. And I talk a lot about this border in my vlog about Lahore, because I actually went to see it. And I had a lot of things to say about it, not gonna lie. So I'm not going to talk about the Wagah border here, but you can watch my vlog about Lahore if you want to hear more about it. But the Wagah border parade was not the only instance where I felt that the military had a big impact on Pakistani culture and Pakistani society. So other examples were the Army Museum in Lahore, which I didn't actually go to, but I did see it from the outside, and I thought that was very shocking. Or all of the military and militaristic slogans that you could see all over Gilgit-Baltistan really, but specifically in Skardu and the Skardu area. Or for example, at a checkpoint, there was a woman who, she was not in the military, she was not a military woman, she was not in uniform, but she was wearing a khaki green dress, and the hijab that she was wearing had a camouflage pattern on it. And that was so shocking to me, so striking. And again, I don't mean this as criticism at all. It was just very, very interesting to me as a foreigner. Another culture shock that I had in Pakistan was the culture around horse riding and horses. So if you watched my vlog about Fairy Meadows, you will know about this one, but basically I ride horses in my home country in Spain. I actually own a horse and I do English show jumping. And I spent 3 days riding horses in northern Pakistan in Fairy Meadows, and the culture around horses is just so different. The first thing I noticed is that the saddle is very different. So where I live, we use English saddles. I think they're pretty standard all over Europe, and they're used in the United States a lot too. And from my understanding, the English saddle is also used in Pakistan, but they're very expensive, so a lot of people can't afford them, and they use kind of, not knockoffs, they do their best to replicate it, but it's clearly not an English saddle. And the thing that really interested me was that the girth, like the kind of belt that goes around a horse's tummy to secure the saddle in place to make sure it doesn't move, was so thin. It was a really thin strap of leather, whereas ours is pretty thick. You want that girth to be thick, so that really surprised me. And also there was a blanket over the saddle. So we usually have like a little blanket underneath our saddle to protect the horse from the saddle itself. But in Pakistan, they have one under and one over, which I thought was interesting. Also in Europe, we always get on and off the horse on the left side of the horse. And I naively thought that it would be like this in every country around the world, but apparently it isn't. So in Pakistan, it doesn't really matter what side you get off and on. So it was really interesting when they told me to get on the horse on the right side. I couldn't do it. Like my brain couldn't compute because I've been riding for like 16 years or something like that, and not once have I gotten on a horse on the right side. So that was surprisingly difficult. But that was also incredibly interesting because I have never seen that anywhere in my like 16 years of riding. Most horses in northern Pakistan are also bred and trained to be polo horses, which polo is not super common in Europe. I feel like in the UK, in Great Britain, they do practice a slightly different version of polo, like it's more British, it has more rules and stuff. But other than in the UK, I don't think that polo is a very important horse-related sport in Europe or anywhere else really. But in Pakistan, it is such an important sport. It is super important. And most horses are, again, bred and trained for that. So they're smaller horses, they're not as big necessarily. And they also don't respond to the leg. So the standard way of training a horse in Europe and in the United States is for it to respond to the leg, which means that when you press your legs against the horse, like you press with your lower leg, the horse will go forward, it will trot, it will canter. And the horses in Pakistan don't respond to that. They're not trained to the leg. They respond to the voice and to the whip, which we also use in Europe, but in a different way. They're kind of supplementary and not the main mode of getting your horse to go forward. But in Pakistan, it is the main way to get your horse to go forward. And also when we use the voice in Europe, if we want a horse to move forward, to trot or to canter, we go like this. But in Pakistan, they say choo, choo, and the horse will go forward, like it will run. So this video ended up being much longer than I anticipated. I still have a few more culture shocks that I want to talk about, but they were kind of smaller, or I don't have as much to say. But something that I found really interesting was the focus that Pakistani people have on education. Like everywhere that I went, there were so many ads for people to study in Australia or the UK and stuff like that. Like there was just so much publicity and advertising around universities and higher education, which I thought was really interesting. And this is not necessarily a culture shock, but I was really surprised to see how green Pakistan is. So if you watched my vlog about Islamabad, I talk a bit more about that there, but basically the way that Pakistan is portrayed in Western media is as a very dry place, a very dry desertic place with very like yellow and beige tones. They never portray it as a green place, so it was really surprising to go to Pakistan and learn how green it actually is. So places like Fairy Meadows and Deosai National Park in the mountains are very, very green, but also the cities are super green. Like Islamabad is incredibly green, and I didn't go to Abbottabad, but I did go pretty close to the city. Like I did see the city from the road and it was also incredibly green. Like a lot of KPK is so green. So I was very pleasantly surprised to find out about that. And anyways, if you made it until the end of this video, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And if you like this video, make sure you like, you comment, and you subscribe. It really helps me out a lot. So thank you so much, and I will see you in the next one.